Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives in the world's leading global brands. Today's show, we're joined by Cara Bibbiani, who's a Director of HR, Merger and Acquisitions at Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Welcome to the show, Cara. How are you?
Thanks, Chris. I'm great. How about yourself?
Not too bad, not too bad. I told you before the show that we decided to build this entire new studio, so I'm sorry that you're our guinea pig and hopefully it all works.
No worries. And I just moved home, so the reason I have this background is so you can't see boxes and disaster behind me.
Is the Game of Thrones like a homage to the craziness that's going on right now at home?
I think it's appropriate to M&A, but also what the inside of my house looks like as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, where are you located?
So I just left Texas for South Carolina, so
Nice.
I am now on the Atlantic.
Yeah. What's it like moving during the pandemic?
It actually was much smoother than I thought. It took me only a week to sell my house, which is kind of crazy.
Wow.
And I thought I might have some issues getting movers because I've heard there's a lot of activity, but I was able to book movers and
nice.
It was pretty seamless actually. Yeah.
Amazing. Is that just for work or just something for lifestyle or?
So that's a great question. I was actually I am in a relationship that was long distance for a couple years. And then round about middle of this year, I had only seen my partner once
Wow.
because of COVID. And so I thought, what better time to make this official and move
Congrats.
since we're all working remotely for the foreseeable future. So I did it for personal reasons.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Congratulations. Now more than ever, we need to be together. So why not? Especially where everyone can work wherever you are in the world. We're no longer defined by location in many ways, right?
Very lucky in that regard.
Yeah, so I could tell you the amount of friends and family of mine that are fleeing the city or cities that they're working within, right? Because before you kind of had to work in London, right, or central London for the job, or New York, or wherever it may be. But now people are like, you know what? I don't want that lifestyle. I don't want to be trapped in. Trust me, I live in an apartment, and I can tell you right now, during the pandemic, and now we're going back in, living in a small apartment in a city is not enjoyable. And my wife and I are actively right now, we need to get a house because especially with a little one running around, you need that space to be outside. So. But yeah, cool. Well, before we go any further, tell everyone kind of a little bit more about yourself and sort of your background and experience. I think we discovered before the show that we're both dancers, which is pretty cool. Yeah. How does a dancer end up being in this role? Tell us that.
That's a great question. So yeah, a little bit of background. So I'm currently the Director of HR, Mergers and Acquisitions at HPE, as you mentioned. And that includes our project management teams, our M&A total rewards teams, our M&A data management teams, and our management of change group. So really everyone across HR who's responsible for the people side of a merger or an acquisition. Mm-hmm. But I've had lots of different careers, I would say. I've lived all over the world. I've lived in many apartments in cities like New York and Madrid and LA, Seoul, South Korea. So I've kind of run the gamut. But yes, I was a performer for many years, singer and dancer with the NBA and the NFL and the USO. Mm-hmm. So for the troops overseas.
Wow.
And I think kind of everything that I've ever done lends itself to people. HR is a type of performance, one could argue. You're working with people. Yeah. So I think it all translates.
Yeah. A really random question. I'm sure no one's ever asked you this, but what have you taken from dance that's translated over to your role that's helped?
So for me, it's about more than just you. So, you can go out there on the floor with a group of folks and, do your best and if the whole team isn't in sync, then, it's kind of all for naught. So you really learn. And I think this is true of any sport, how important the team dynamic is. And, it's not just about you.
Yeah.
So that translates to everything, I think.
Yeah. I love that, by the way. And I actually say the same thing because growing up playing basketball, ice hockey, even performing as a dance group, you are right. You can't win the game on your own or the dance competition in that case, as well. And when I went into a business environment, I was certain businesses I joined were very much designed about the individual KPIs, for example, rather than team KPIs. And I struggled with that. I'm like, wait a minute, you're kind of pitting everyone against each other. Whereas where I came from a sporting background environment where all of the goals, the motivations and the KPIs almost were around how can we work better together and collectively level ourselves up. So that's something that
100%.
took me a while to get used to, that when I first went into a business, saying, this is strange. What's going on here?
And you have to put in the energy and the effort and the practice, right? You can't just show up and perform. So, I think that's relevant as well.
Yeah. In terms of where we are with COVID, how has that affected sort of the M&A activity, the work that you're doing in this new environment?
Yeah, so it's affected it in a lot of ways. I mean, we announced and closed a deal during COVID. So the deal with Silver Peak just closed last month. So we are, doing M&A activity, which I wasn't sure about earlier in the year. I wasn't sure what would happen. And what I'm finding, speaking to colleagues at other firms, is that M&A activity is still happening. In fact, it's happening more. And this, I think, is because there is a lot more opportunity right now to be either defensive or offensive with M&A because of the constraints that we're under. But one of the big changes is we have to do this particular integration entirely virtually. So normally I would be on an airplane pretty early on, flying out to meet with employees, understand their workspace, build some relationship with them, get in with the leadership. And I can't do any of that in person anymore. So we have had to move to, Zoom calls like this, getting to know each other over the internet, not having that face-to-face interaction. So it's been a lot of adaptation and change. And I think M&A is always about adaptation and change.
By
but
nature.
Another layer. Yeah, and HR. So it's interesting.
Do you miss that? Is that something you're like, surely
in person, definitely.
But the travel you don't, or you do actually enjoy that as well? Just out of curiosity.
I enjoy travel. Business travel is a tricky thing. You can be someplace fun or someplace not fun. You don't really get to experience the place too much because you're working. But yeah, I like change. It's why I work in change management. So I always did enjoy getting on a plane, not just to interface with employees, but also just to do something different from the day to day.
Yeah.
This definitely feels monotonous 8 months in. So
I bet. How you made a very good point. It's super important, and I spoke to so many HR executives over the years about putting a face to the name of the person or the organization when you're going through an acquisition, and making sure that you make an effort to fly out, be there. If people can see you, hear you, and it shows them that you value those employees and their opinion, and that matters. And that's a huge part of it, right? The success of the acquisition and change management process. How are you making sure that you can still feel that connectivity in a virtual environment?
Yeah, well, I don't know if we're making sure. I don't know how well we're doing yet. It's just kind of the beginning. We have the first wave of folks will have their employee day one in early November. So we're still kind of leading up to that first phase of onboarding. But we are trying really hard to make sure that we have more webcasts, that we have a virtual onboarding site where they can go and get all the information that you need. We have, support channels, whether they be, email aliases or office hours that we're hosting. We're trying to do everything that we possibly can. And when we think about actually onboarding them in a few weeks, we're trying to do things that are celebratory, but we can't be there in person. We can't pop champagne. We can't, take them to an event where there's a media crew, and there's none of that. So we're trying to figure out what are some things we can do. A little virtual scavenger hunt. We're shipping them a nice, welcome box of branded items. We're doing little things in real time that we think might make a big difference. But to your point, I think one of the big things for me that we don't have in the in-person is we have noticed throughout the years that no matter how many support channels you have available, people are less likely to speak up through those channels than they are when you're face-to-face with them. So
interesting.
That's the part that I just can't quantify yet. When I fly out to places, typically everyone in the room will actually speak up and talk to me about what they're excited about, maybe what they're not excited about. They'll just be more vocal. And so with that removed, I'm just not sure if people are going to really share as much as we'd like them to.
It's interesting because it's tough, right? Because inclusion in this environment is also very difficult, because there's certain voices that on video calls, kind of the extroverts, right, will take up a lot of the space. And there'll be people that will just really don't want to talk up, especially when I'm noticing a lot of companies are making a mistake where they're doing like these calls with too many people on there. And in terms of, instead of doing smaller groups where it's like more likely people to speak up, if there's like 300 people on a call, are you really going to speak out about something that you're concerned about or that you don't like in front of all of those people? But in a smaller group, as you know, when you're there, if people feel more confident whether it's their team with them in a room to talk out as well. So we've got to be careful about that we make space for people to give their opinions and share feedback.
I agree. And one thing we've done as well is we've launched a onboarding buddy program. So we've got a one-to-one buddy for every single person who's coming on board, because normally we'd have teams from, IT and payroll and benefits and you name it on site around the world to help these folks. And we don't have that now. So we are linking them up with a person in the organization they're going into, which in this case is our Aruba business. So I think that's one way that we can help with a little more personalization.
Yeah. But those one-on-ones, right? Because I always ask people, what's the biggest success of a merger and acquisition? It's like, Chris, is like having those one-on-ones face to face. You can't replicate that. You can't scale it. It takes a lot of time. I remember speaking to a CHRO that said, I've been on a plane every week for the last year, going around every single site, every single location, because that's what it takes. And I was like, whoa. to engage each of those leaders and understand their concerns and make sure they understand that this is the part that you play, this is the value you add, this is where you fit into this new direction the business is going. Because no matter how much communication you do digitally, it's just not the same, is it?
I don't think it is. And I think that part, what you just mentioned of we are interested in what you have to say and we are hearing you and we are taking your feedback and putting it into an actionable plan. That's the part that I think comes across much better in person. But again, we're working within these constraints and
exactly.
You've got to do what we can do right now. And I think it's for quite a while longer as well. So
what's the role of HR business partners in acquisitions?
Interesting question. So HR business partners always have those foundational things that they have to do, whether it's, org design and selection, job mapping, the hiring plan, managing attrition, managing talent, performance, all of those things. But then when you are the receiving HR business partner for an acquisition, you have all of the integration things layered on top of it, right? So you have to build a relationship with your counterparts at the target company that you're buying. You have to figure out, well, what are their titles and levels and scope of responsibility at their current company, and how do we map that to our company? And then if there's differences, which inevitably there will be, how do you mitigate that, right? What do you offer them in terms of a retention package or incentives to come? And in our case, we continue to buy a lot of startup organizations, and so startups to me are very different than my company, which is 63,000 people plus across the globe. So you have to think about all of those layers. What is going to be appealing for them if they've gone to work for a startup to come to work for us, and how can we show them that we are this innovative, agile company, which we are. There's a lot that the business partner has to do. There's the cultural pieces. They have to help onboard the executives of that incoming company. So you want those executives to have a good experience. So then that trickles down to the folks on their teams. And mostly you want to make sure that we don't lose a lot of key folks as you bring them over. So.
Yeah. Looking back, and because you've done so many of these at this point in your career, what would you, for everyone who's listening, who perhaps first time going through, or what are some of the lessons that you learned, things that you would do differently and that you are doing differently now? Common mistakes that you're seeing people make that people listening can hopefully avoid?
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a long conversation. So just to do a quick flyby, I would say corporate development definitely needs to bring HR into deals earlier. And, our corporate development team is doing this. But we really do need to provide that insight and counsel based on everything that we've seen. Sometimes corporate development doesn't consider the people aspects of things as much as they should. And so it's really important that we get in there early and call out some of the cultural differences, or call out, we think you might need to push or pull this lever in order to make this deal work. So again, my company is doing a great job of this right now. We are at the table earlier. We are able to call out things and flag things and put solutions in place that are helpful.
What's early, Cara, by the way? Sorry to cut you off. What for everyone listening?
So due diligence. So when they're still trying to figure out, are they going to buy this company? I think just talking to some of my colleagues, there are still HR teams around the world who are not brought in until, it's already been signed on the dotted line, which is a massive mistake, because as you're running the financial numbers, you may not be considering certain things that HR could have brought to your attention. And it could mess up the entire
And have you seen that happen?
So not at my company, but I do know colleagues who, it winds up being a big mess if you haven't consulted HR.
Great.
It can turn out to be a big mess. So yeah, being at the table earlier for sure. And then I would say the leadership of the receiving business unit. So, whichever group that acquisition is going into, those leaders must be front and center and engaged and participatory and really take onus for onboarding these employees and for them having a great experience. The HR M&A team and the broader M&A integration team, yes, we do our jobs and we're good at our jobs, but
it's not the role of HR, right? It's the role of everyone.
It's exactly.
And the leaders.
And so if those employees don't see leaders as invested or interested or, it used to be at their sites and now it would be, popping into webcasts, that's a huge miss. So for me, I think that's probably one of the most critical pieces is that they get to know our leaders and they understand that our leaders actually get the deal rationale, that they were at the table early and they're the ones who wanted the deal to happen, and then that they are going to continually be out there front and center with the strategy and welcoming them aboard.
At what stage then do you start talking to leaders about this in the process? At what stage do you then start engaging?
I do it during due diligence. So
okay.
In diligence, there's only a very, very small group of people because you're under NDA.
Of course, legally,
so
yeah.
There's not a lot of folks there, but there are obviously leaders from the receiving business unit there. And so I start as early as diligence. And I call out what I'm able to call out from a cultural perspective, from an HR perspective. And I try to lay out how critical their role is in the success of the integration.
What advice would you give to other leaders that are part of companies where that isn't currently the process and they're brought in later? How should they approach it? Did you have to do that, or were you quite lucky that the team understood the value in bringing HR in early?
I think this is a trend overall, as HR has shifted from operational to more strategic, just generally in the industry. I think it's happened in M&A as well. So HR is now more consultative. And I think, certainly I have fought to be there earlier, but I think it's also just the trend that's happening.
You wrote in a note, I'm laughing now because when you sent it over to me, how M&A appears sexy, but is in fact very challenging and tactical and ever changing. No, I love that because it's so true as well, and as well. So, what has kept you engaged in this? Because it takes a certain type of person to do this job, the role that you have. And if for anyone getting into this role, what can they expect? I want to give them the raw reality of what it means, because as you mentioned, it can be seen as sexy on the outside, but what's the reality?
Right. And I think it's considered sexy because you're not allowed to talk about it, right? So it's like covert ops, right? And people think that it's just super fascinating and awesome. And it is in many ways, but bringing a company into another company is just a massive piece of work. And it takes hundreds of people on both sides. And the thing I think that's most challenging is every single deal is different. So we did 3 deals last year, and I could take all the lessons that I learned from those deals, and I guarantee you that you'd have to throw most of them out the window for the deal that we're doing now. It's extremely fluid. It's like trying to pin a wave upon the sand. Nothing is going to be the same in any acquisition. And now you add COVID on top of it, and it's ever changing M&A.
Yeah. Is anything, you mentioned startups earlier, and I was going to ask, but I forgot. Is anything specific that makes a startup more challenging than bringing in a larger organization? What are the things that people should look out for?
So to me, it depends on the motivations of the employees, right? So if employees really want to work in a small think tank, and wear a hoodie and bring their dog to work, that could look very different than a corporation that they're going into. So it's really about what inspires and keeps those employees at that company. But I think if they just want to be innovative, there's a lot that we can do to explain our innovation story and why they want to be a part of it. But again, it comes back to what they wanted in the first place.
But is it up to us then to make sure we manage that expectation? Because I know a number of my friends and family have been in startups, they've been acquired, and they're like, oh, this is not what I thought. They don't like that new environment, like you said, which is much more structured, more process, and they end up leaving in some cases as well.
Yeah, it's up to us to manage expectations, but I think it's also up to corporate development to assess more of those cultural
in advance
mismatches, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because culture is one of the last things I think that the team pursuing the deal will look at,
which is crazy,
as a factor in whether or not they will proceed. And I think it's one of the first reasons that a deal falls apart. So we have to get better at that piece of it.
So it's just funny because we measure culture fit as kind of really high on the agenda in our companies and organizations, but when it comes to M&A, it's like the last thing, which seems pretty crazy when you think about it.
It is crazy.
Yeah. What are some of the new trends you're seeing in the M&A field?
So I think people are being more creative with benefits packages. And I think sometimes as you're acquiring companies, it used to be you just tried to slam them into your benefits and your wellness and the way that you do things. And I'm seeing folks being more mindful in assessing what the new company is doing. And, maybe we're going to borrow that from them and make that available for our whole population. I'm seeing actually more deal activity during COVID, which I think everyone thought would be the opposite.
It makes sense though, because there's more opportunities now, and good and bad in the ways that there are some companies that are struggling that then acquired, and so there's positives. But I'm not surprised.
I think the way that teams are resourced is changing too, and this just is kind of all over the place. So sometimes companies will have a full dedicated integration team that only works on deals. And then sometimes companies will bring in consultants to do the deal work. And then other companies will have maybe a little SWAT team that works on the deals. And then other folks who come in are just designated. So it's on top of their day job. So I'm seeing a lot of folks shift the way they resource deals. And I expect that'll probably shift even more now that we have virtual work going on. So
well, people are realizing that. You're right, because no matter where you are now, the work doesn't have to be done by the team in the location. So I'm seeing many companies starting to understand, actually, the way we utilize our workforce and our resources that we exist is kind of open field now to be able to look at that completely differently.
It is. It's a clean slate. Yeah, anything is possible.
Yeah. What about some sort of guiding principles? Because I'm sure going through all this, do you have any particular guiding principles that you, whenever you're going into a new M&A activity, that you kind of, these are my guiding principles for no matter what the situation, that you could share with everyone?
I think probably one of the biggest ones is just to over communicate. I think there's this tendency of, maybe we don't have the answer, or, we're building that solution. And so we're not going to say anything. And I think saying that you have nothing to say is always better than saying nothing. It's really 100%. Simple, but people forget about that one. Mm-hmm. So especially in an integration when there's so much uncertainty and anxiety, you have to over communicate. Onboarding can be a lot about red tape. There's bureaucracy, there's process, there's legal, there's compliance, there's all sorts of things, but you have to really balance that out with relationship building. There will be red tape and it will be difficult and people will stub their toe, but if you can make it more about relationships and getting to know leaders and getting to network with your colleagues and becoming part of a family, I think you can tip the scales. So people are less annoyed by the red tape part. Mm-hmm. I think a big one is there's always a reason that you buy a company. You buy them for their special sauce. And I think sometimes because you have so many people working on a deal and maybe folks leave and the knowledge transfer gets lost, but sometimes they forget the whole reason for the deal. It kind of gets lost. And sometimes you are a year down the line asking that company to completely change the one thing that they were doing great and is the whole reason you bought them. So, I mean, that sounds crazy that can get lost, but it really can.
I've seen that firsthand. What the company I used to work for was acquired, and within months, they had completely changed the fundamental of things that made us successful. And in the following months, most of the leadership team had left. So the best talent in the business at two levels, the managers and the leaders. I was one of the kind of second layer of leadership. I left, and I was like, everything that made this company great, you've basically changed everything, the way we work. And guess what? Obviously, we started losing clients. We started losing our best talent, and it was really sad because obviously I was there for 10 years, and kind of a few years, probably like a year later, they actually sold off the business in parts to try and get back to kind of get back a little bit of the rate. And I was just like, Just leave it alone.
And that one goes back to the first one, which is communication and over communicating. So I think a lot of times the people who are initially setting up the deal, they phase out, and then it's a different group of people who are doing the integration, and that's a big issue. You need to have that baton pass so that the people who are actually doing the implementation.
Yeah, it was like, oh, this is how we did it in the last company, and this is how we're gonna do it now. And I was like, well, why did you buy us then? It's like, this is what was we were super profitable, we're doing really well, like but it was crazy. It's actually still upsets you to this day to see because I spent a lot of time and years there, and it's like you just came in and changed that. What about in terms of the kind of model and the way that you do things? Has that changed at all in terms of the model and the service delivery model for deals? Is that shifted or changed?
So our model has changed over the last few years, and that's because we went from a giant company and we split, HP Inc.
into HP Enterprises,
yes. And so, we've gotten more nimble, we've gotten leaner over the years. And so we do have fewer dedicated folks working on M&A than we did, 4 or 5 years ago. And I'm not making a judgment call on that, good or bad. It's just different. And I think it's always a choice point for leadership is to figure out how you want to resource M&A. So kind of, again, going back to the communication, I think the more you have the same people doing deals with that knowledge and the key learning, the better your success rate could be. So I would always like to see more dedicated. But I've seen deals be very successful bringing in consultants or leveraging designated resources.
What does that decision-making process look like? What quantifies actually, we should bring in some consulting versus we don't need to do that? I've always been interested to see. Is that
I don't have a ton of insight into that. I think where my team can play a role is to basically say, here's our capacity and bandwidth.
Okay.
Whether it's, number of employees or complexity of the deal, here's what we feel like. For example, we think we can support 3 deals of X size in X countries without needing to pull in consultants. So I think it's really up to us to define our thresholds, if you will.
Okay. When do you, speaking to peers, when do they normally bring in consultants? What's normally the challenge where
if there's a really giant merger or acquisition, they when I say they, I don't mean my company. I mean, in general, companies tend to bring in consultancies because there's just so much work to be done.
Yeah, it makes sense. If it's a deal of that scale and size, you want to make sure nothing goes wrong as well, and you have all the support. What's kept you engaged? You mentioned a little bit earlier, though, but how long have you been doing this work now?
I've been doing this for about 4 years.
And do you think there's something you continue, or do you think you're going to move to another kind of area of HR, or is this kind of you found the place?
I really love this. So this fits my personality super well because I love change. So yes, I am in the same space, HR, M&A, but like I said, every deal is different. Every group and population of employees is different, and the challenges and opportunities you have on every deal is something completely different from what you just did. So for me, that constant change is exciting, and I love it. And I'm here for the duration.
Yeah. We had a few people ask on LinkedIn. Sorry, I haven't had a chance to look at the questions, guys, but thank you so much. Ask kind of what has been your kind of real life experiences regarding the culture change element, and what have been your learnings from those exercises in terms of like how to, make sure we manage the culture change effectively.
So, one thing that we started doing a few deals ago is having a very robust survey strategy. So really understanding as soon as the deal is closed and we're able to legally talk to employees, asking them, what excites you about this integration, or maybe what concerns you about this integration? What are the cultural aspects that you think we should preserve from your company? Or maybe what are the cultural things that you didn't like about your company? And then as with any survey, the responsibility is then we look at that. We dig into it, we analyze it, and then we go back, we close that loop, and we say, here's what we heard from you, and here's what we're actually doing about it, right? So if these 3 things are really important to you all culturally, we're going to see how we can maintain those and maybe, adapt them for the group that you're going into. Or, if you're really, really concerned about bureaucracy, for example, we're going to see how we can get rid of some of that red tape, make things more streamlined for you as you're coming in. So for me, the cultural piece is as always, it's about listening and understanding, and then reacting and responding.
Yeah, but as soon as you can, as soon as possible,
and then all the way through too.
And all the way through, it doesn't end. That's the thing.
Mistake.
Yes.
Yeah. So integrations go on for 3, 4, 5 years. There's a very, very long tail, and that's another thing you have to be really careful of. Is once you've got that deal rationale and the strategy and the integration team, and you've got them onboarded, and now they're an employee, and you can't just drop out of sight. You have to make sure that folks are still working with this group, communicating with this group. And following and watching how they are integrating.
And you made such a good point. Now I'm glad we said that, because so many people, there's no end date on this.
There is no end date.
It's not a project that kind of ends in 6 months, or it's an ongoing activity as well. Yeah. I had an interesting question here, and I appreciate you're not the one directly making a decision whether you purchase a company or not, but Stefan, I know Stefan, it's a big question. Stefan said, would you acquire a company that has a great product, very profitable, but doesn't have the same values and culture? That's an interesting question. I
would have to know more about what those values and that culture look like. But yeah, I would say that's not a reason I would take it off the table. Okay. I think you have to get really granular and understand how big are those gaps. If you feel like it's just too big to bridge, then yeah. You can
have it standalone, right? You can still acquire it and then have it operate in its own standalone business.
Well, definitely. There's different ways that you can do it. We took Aruba, a company a few years ago, and we've generally left them alone. We kept their brand name because it was really strong in the market. So there, to your point, there's different ways that you can decide to bring them into your company versus just, we're going to turn you over into HPE and, everything's going to come over. There's different ways, but I think culture is something that we really need to investigate much more, just not even in M&A, just everyone in every company needs to look more closely at culture and understand the implications and what you can influence and what you can't.
But I'm glad, going back to your point earlier, I'm glad that we're speaking about this now, about making sure we put that front and center from the beginning. Yeah. Because again, I mentioned firsthand how I've seen that work really badly on the other end. But it's a good question Stefan made there, because I'm sure there's so many companies that the companies come across that are very profitable, great product, but the culture and values are just so far from the organization, and it's an interesting conundrum.
Perhaps, but culture is also always evolving.
That's true.
The culture at my company is very different today than it was 4 years ago. So
even recently because of COVID.
Well, exactly.
We've seen people, their values change.
It's such a changing thing. So, and this goes back to when you're assessing companies. You might look at a company 4 years ago, 6 years ago, and feel like they were too far apart. But then you look again next year, and they've come very close together. So, again, just everything changes constantly. So it's a difficult space to navigate.
So if you want to be in M&A, just know everything's changed. That's part of it, right?
If you like change,
come on over. Before we wrap up, thanks so much, first and foremost. Really insightful, and a topic that we don't talk enough about, I think, on the show, or just in general. So I really appreciate you coming on to share your insights and your experience. We're going to jump into our quick fire round to end it. And so I'm going to ask you 5 questions. I ask every guest this. I never tell them that I'm going to ask it. and you have 30 seconds to give us some amazing answers. Are you ready?
Okay.
All right. What was the number one thing that was holding you back from becoming a successful leader in this area? Biggest challenge?
Asking for what I deserve.
Oh, love that. Love that. What's the best piece of business advice you've ever received?
Run your own race.
What's one book you'd recommend to our audience, and why?
The Grapes of Wrath, because it's about perseverance.
Love it. I love that name, by the way, already. Just the name in general. Sounds great. And what's one internet resource, or some of the internet resources that you use personally to stay up to date with current events and continue, or your own personal learning? Kind of what's in the tab? What's in the browser? What are your go-to sites or learning resources?
So, I actually love Deloitte, the consulting firm. And I sent you an article ahead of this conversation. I think Deloitte, at least in the M&A space and HR M&A space, it always has great insights, and they stay at the pulse of what's going on. They host lots of great conferences where leaders get together and talk about things. So I love checking out what they have to say.
Amazing. And then lastly, what's one thing about your business that you're most excited about?
That it's shifting literally daily.
I love the fact that everyone else, by the way, sorry to cut you off, that's like the scary part for you. That's the most exciting part.
There's so much opportunity, though.
You're right. You're right. Okay.
COVID has been such a challenge, but it's literally changed every aspect of life across the world. So, for better and for worse. So I just think it's fascinating how we're all adapting in real time. And, we've got, I think, many more months, of doing this adaptation, but you learn and you grow and, you fail a little bit, but the constant change, I think, is so exciting. Where might we be like a year from now, given these parameters? Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? And you are right. That is very, very exciting, scary and exciting. But the most things that are worth having normally come after you being scared and
right, you're forced out of your comfort zone.
Exactly. I try to say to the team all the time now is the motto is to seek discomfort. Right, that needs to be. We need to live in that place because that's when the magic happens. I don't think we've ever done anything really, worthwhile doing that hasn't come from a place of discomfort, as well. So I think we need to embrace that. It's easy to say, I get it, but you need that. It's a muscle, right? I think the more you spend time in that place, the more that muscle develops to be able to do that as well. But thank you so much for taking the time out to join us. Really appreciate your actionable advice, insights. We're all going to be a lot better off for it. Before we wrap up, if there's sort of one parting piece of advice you could give to your peers in this space of M&A, what would that be? And also, where's the best place in to catch up with you? If they want to say hello, reach out, say hello to Cara, where can they get hold of you?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think kind of what we've been talking about, it's get creative. If ever there was a time to stop rinsing and repeating what we're doing, it's now. Every single day, every integration is new, and it's time to adapt and thrive, really. And LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to connect with folks, chat.
Amazing. Fantastic. And for everyone on LinkedIn, sorry I didn't get to all your questions. I'll make sure that me and Cara check them out after. Appreciate you joining us as always. If you're new to the show, please, like, comment, share, tag a colleague that you feel will benefit from today's episode as well. And if you're new, you can head over to hrdleaders.com/podcast to subscribe to your favorite platform. Apart from that, thank you again, Cara. And for everyone listening, wish you all the best until we see you again, which is probably going to be tomorrow. So see you tomorrow. Bye for now, Cara.
Thanks, Chris.
Bye.